The goji plant is best known for its berries, but it also produces tremendous amounts of foliage. In fact, even trying to keep it corralled as we are, it's quite invasive. The good news is that the leaves are edible too, and we can just harvest what's in the way and make cream of goji soup with it. Another kind of goji soup is actually traditional in Asia, and it's thought to improve memory and mental performance. Sometimes mothers make it for their kids before exams. The recipes I found were honestly not my kind of thing, so I invented this one. In addition to the goji leaves, we need some kind of onions. My Egyptian walking onions are doing well, so I'm going to use just the tops of them. You can see these are starting to reproduce from little bulbs at the top, so I will skip those and take only leaves that aren't making any sets. If you need to use store-bought onions, that's okay, and you can use either the bulb or green onions. This is a flexible recipe because those of us who cook from the garden have got to learn to be flexible and work with what's available. I'm being flexible today by making use of something I have an overabundance of, perennial leeks. These are juveniles, and last year I wouldn't eat them this young because I was afraid of not having enough. Boy, was I wrong. They are so prolific. So I'm going to pull out a clump or two where they have made clumps and eat the big ones and the little ones, but just putting back one or two little ones from each clump. I'm going to do this right now before I forget and water them in. And based on my experience thus far, in less than 6 months, those little babies will become mature themselves and begin to produce a clump of their own. I'll just firm the soil around them, and then we will get on with preparing our goji greens. They have substantial thorns, so you would think this would be difficult. Happily, it's not. Let's just set the leeks and onions aside for a moment and work on these gojis. The safest way to avoid the thorns is to pluck the leaves off at right angles to the stem so that you're always moving away from the thorns. By the way, my leaves at present have a slight amount of powdery mildew on them, which seems to be fairly common in goji berries. The plants have never really been set back by it, so I have not needed to do much about it except wash the leaves thoroughly when I get them cleaned. Particularly on the less mature parts of the stem, you may find that you can learn a trick of running from the branch tip downwards towards the base of the plant and strip off the leaves that way. Apparently, the thorns are flexible enough that you can kind of bend them as you go and stay out of the way of the business end. A combination of techniques is likely to work out best. Let's talk about amounts for a minute. I am aiming today to make 4 adult-sized servings that are meal-sized servings, not a side dish. In their unprocessed state, I now have about a half gallon of goji berries and an equal volume of onion and leek. For a 2-serving recipe, I would want roughly a quart each of onions and goji berries before they're chopped up and processed. If you strip the leaves unceremoniously, as I did, you're likely to have little bits of stem hanging on to the more mature leaves. While these won't really hurt anything, they are tough. They never tenderize, so it's best to go through the whole pile of leaves and snip them off. It's easy, just a fingertip action. It takes a few minutes, but it's worth it for the textural improvement of the soup. Now it's time to chop the leaves up. I always do this by hand. I like to do it pretty fine, and inevitably you will find another piece or two of stem that you missed and want to remove it as you work. I do most things in the kitchen by hand, and I know a lot of people like food processors. I'm not sure if one will chop these leaves or puree them, but try it if you want. Next, the onions need chopping. In this case, onions and leeks, but whatever kind of alliums you have. I usually lay them right on the bed of the goji greens so that those greens still get a little bit of additional chopping. In the case of leeks, it's a judgment call how much of the stem is tender enough to enjoy. In this case, these are newbies, so a lot, but not always. Time to saute the greens. 1/4 cup of canola oil for the big recipe that I'm making, only 1/8 cup for a 2-serving recipe. The huge volume that we began with will become greatly reduced as the greens are sauteed. Here are the other ingredients that we need. Cream-style corn, and optional is Parmesan cheese. The corn goes in next. Turn the heat very low and stir in 1 can for the 2-serving size, 2 cans for the 4-serving size. From this point on, the stirring must never stop. For the smaller batch, stir in 2 cups of cream. For the larger batch, stir in 1 quart. I find it inconvenient to keep cream on hand, so I buy Anthony's cream powder and mix it up for the batch, and I find that works just great. Next comes the optional Parmesan cheese. If you do want it to be a meal, it's not a bad idea because it adds substantially to the protein. The trick to getting Parmesan cheese to dissolve properly in a recipe is to start with a relatively high-fat recipe, and we've taken care of that with the cream, and to then stir it very patiently over low heat. You will have to squish some lumps, but it does dissolve completely and thickens the soup. Here's the recipe. The first set of numbers applies to the smaller batch to make 2 adult meal-sized servings. The second set applies to the double-sized batch. So you need 1 or 2 quarts of fresh goji leaves and the same amount of any kind of onion, 1 or 2 cans of cream-style corn, 2 cups or 1 quart of cream, salt to taste. You didn't see me put it in, but I tossed in a tiny bit. It doesn't take much because the cream corn and the Parmesan cheese do add a little bit of saltiness. And if you choose to use Parmesan cheese, 1/2 or 1 cup of it dried. Using cream powder, here's the strength at which I mix it.